All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Wow, it's really great to be back here today to talk about what is a rapidly exploding topic on generative AI and its impact on national security. So I'm Kim Crider. I lead Deloitte's AI innovation for national security and defense. So I have a particular interest in how our U.S. government public sector agencies are trying to implement and address AI and bring AI at scale. And in doing so, how do we protect ourselves? How do we get the most benefit out of AI, but how do we do it in a smart, protected, and assured way? Now, this topic of generative AI is creating a lot of opportunity for us across the board. We see so many advances in this area of generative AI that we're going to dig into here today with our panel members. And talk a little bit more about what this means and the benefits that it can provide. But we'll also talk a little bit about the challenges and the implications of some potential threats that generative AI can bring, particularly in terms of our national security and defense. So with me today, I have some amazing panelists joining us, and I'm very excited to introduce them to you to help us really dig in on this exciting and compelling topic. So first and foremost, we have Nina Schick. Nina is an author, entrepreneur, and advisor in the topic of generative AI, and she is on a mission to make AI accessible. One of the first Gen AI experts, Nina analyzes how this nascent field of artificial intelligence will change humanity. Before specializing in generative AI, Nina worked on geopolitical crises, including Brexit, the Russian-Ukraine war, and state-sponsored disinformation. She's advised leaders, including President Joe Biden and Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO. She's a seasoned media commentator, appearing regularly on BBC, Sky, Bloomberg, and CNBC. She's been published by Wired, Time, MIT Tech Review, and The Times. She's a founder of Tamang Ventures, an adversary and creative firm focused on generative AI, and she's delivered keynote speeches for businesses and organizations around the world. Nina's debut book, Deep Fakes, the first book on AI-generated content, was released in 2020 and has been translated into 5 languages. And I know we're going to speak a little bit about her book and her work there and how it, really that topic helped get this conversation going in 2020, and things have just been taken off ever since then. Nina herself speaks 7 languages and calls London, Berlin, and Kathmandu her home. Thank you, Nina, for joining us here today.
Such a pleasure to be here, Kim. Thank you so much for hosting this conversation.
Thank you. Also joining me is Captain Jazmin Furtado. Captain Jazmin Furtado has been a part of the software innovation realm of the DoD, where she was the data strategy lead for the U.S. Space Force's data platforms and a Space Force liaison for the Air Force's Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Office, and the space project lead with the MIT AI Accelerator. Prior to that, Jazmin was in various leadership, advisory, and product management roles with the Air Force, SpaceX, and Massachusetts General Hospital, designing and scaling artificial intelligence, data management, and education programs and products. Captain Furtado is currently a fellow at Google. Jazmin, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. All right, well, let's get into it. So, Nina, last fall, you and I met here for the first time on America Future Series Class Summit, where you introduced our audience to this idea of generative AI from your recent book that I mentioned, Deep Fakes. Now, that talk was just 4 months ago. And since then, the topic of generative AI has taken off literally like wildfire. For those who were not able to tune in last fall, and for the rest of us who are still trying to catch up with this fast-spreading topic, please get us all on the same page. What is generative AI? And what did you mean in your book by this notion of the coming infocalypse as it relates to generative AI?
It's a great question, and it's the perfect place to start, because generative AI, really the coronation year for generative AI was last year as a term that hadn't even been coined before then. And now it is everywhere. It's a new type of artificial intelligence, really, Kim, a type of AI that can create new data, as opposed to discriminatory AI, the type of AI we're used to seeing, which is more about labeling and categorizing data. Now, it's only been within the realm of the possible for about the last 10 years or so, with real breakthroughs happening in the last kind of 3 to 4 years. And now what we're seeing is that these breakthroughs are becoming scalable foundational models. And it turns out that what AI can generate is essentially anything we've assumed thus far is unique to human creativity or intelligence, or assist in the production of, and it can generate stuff or content in any digital format, in audio, in video, in images. So essentially, all of the digital content we interact with, all of the creative content we make, all of the digital information that we interact with online is increasingly going to be produced with the help of AI. The first kind of viral form of generative AI, this is where my journey into this area started, is in deep fakes. And when I talk about the infocalypse, it was this concept that when AI generated content, i.e. content that is scalable across every medium, starts to become a reality, which is happening now, the entire information ecosystem is not only going to be so inundated, we're going to create so much new data and so much new content, including malicious content and spammy content, that we are just not going to know how to navigate an already corrupt and corroded information ecosystem. So that's the idea of the infocalypse.
Yeah, it's amazing. So the AI is generating content for us, and it's creating a situation that is hitting us like a tidal wave. And how do we really manage our way through it? What should we be thinking about in terms of how we can deal with this phenomenon, and the positive and negative aspects of it?
Again, another great question. So I think the first step is just getting the conceptual framework right. So that means understanding the paradigm shift that is coming. This is a step change, not only for the world of work, for the world of digital content, but this is really a step change for society. I worked in geopolitics for basically 2 decades, and I witnessed how exponential technologies were shaping like the macro picture of the world, but also impacting every individual on the level of their personal lives. And I think that this was already profound enough before kind of this AI revolution and this new form of AI came into the picture. So I think that we've reached an inflection point where technology is actually going to reshape the framework of society. It's just not going to even be integrated into the existing frameworks. So when we think about how do we even deal with this coming change, I think the first step is to understand the scale of change, the pace of acceleration, because technology now is truly exponential. We just mentioned that the term was only created last year, and this year is a year where you're going to see it being applied into numerous real life situations. And you're absolutely right to point out again that this isn't only dangerous technology, this is technology that has tremendous utility. In fact, I conceive of it as a new foundational layer for the internet and the information ecosystem itself. I think that increasingly all human creativity, all human knowledge, and all digital information is going to have this AI layer on top of it. So really, just first of all, understanding how big this is, how unprecedented it is, how fast it's moving is the first step. And then we can start breaking down the subheadings, if you will. How is it going to be weaponized? How is it going to do amazing things? Because it literally applies to every single domain, whether it's business utility, whether it's cybersecurity, whether it's national security, whether it's creativity. Every single domain of human activity and knowledge is going to be affected by generative AI.
Fascinating. Okay, so thank you for setting us up. I think you've really piqued our interest here in so many ways. So let's start breaking this down. Now, Jazmin, you've been working in both commercial and government spaces for a while now. How do you see generative AI being viewed in these communities? Is it garnering a lot of attention? What do you see happening in the spaces where you're operating as this phenomena is rapidly rolling out?
Yeah, so a lot of this is going off of what Nina was saying. Thank you for laying that foundation, because it is truly everywhere. I can't get away from this conversation. ChatGPT is just like everywhere. It's so accessible. Tools like this are so accessible, and it's really cool to see how people around me are using it and trying to understand it, because it's something now that they can touch and play around with, in a manner of speaking. It's something that they can use in a more personalized way than ever before. So they can use it for their own personal needs, which is something that wasn't a way that AI was being used. So it's no longer this perception of AI is the Terminator, or it's hidden somewhere lurking in the depths of the machine. People are experimenting with it. It's right in front of their faces, and they're learning from it. So in the workplace, especially, we're seeing people already using it when it comes to documentation creation, creating emails. I've seen people use it to draft up contracts. I've also seen like people trying to use it to put together speeches. I mean, we have all of these top-down educational initiatives, but this is really a bottoms-up educational initiative where people are learning themselves and they're motivated to learn themselves. And yes, it's immature, and I think people are realizing very quickly what its limitations are currently, but this tool is wanted. You can't deny that, and it's very easily usable. I mean, I pose a question to the audience to think about how many people have brought this topic up in their workplace. And then more so, how many people with little to no AI background have been talking about it? I mean, with AI breakthroughs in the past, these conversations were not as widespread as they are now. They were more in these like artificial intelligence or data spaces. But now, because it's affecting day to day, people are becoming experts in it. People are talking about it, and it's really opened the aperture to the number of people that are weighing in on it. And
Yeah.
the best piece of it is, or a really important piece of it is, it doesn't cost anything. People are able to access it for $0. It's very it's garnered a lot of
phenomenal insight there, Jazmin. I love the way you're kind of getting after this a little bit, in the sense that talking about from your experience what you've seen, that this new technology, this generative AI, has made AI so much more accessible, right, to the everyday user. It's so much more real, right, to people, that people are very quickly recognizing that AI is a thing that can be accessible, that they can leverage, that they can ask questions of, and it speaks to what Nina was talking about, right? It unleashes their own creativity, and each individual person now has some technology at their fingertips that they can start to use, they can start to leverage to create documents, to write code, to create images, to take their imagination and build upon it. And that's exciting, right? And that's encouraging, and that's powerful and very positive, and self and reaffirming, right, in terms of what this can do for society. And so that's neat, right? That's that makes it something that we all want to be a part of, and everybody's talking about, as you're saying, everybody's talking about. There's a movement here that's pretty exciting. When we think about some of the risks, though, what are you hearing in your circles in terms of some of the risks and the challenges associated with this, other than it still being nascent and having certain limitations to it?
Yeah, so the conversation around generative AI is really an extension of the conversations that we're already having in the AI space. I mean, the utilization of generative AI and the use cases are different, and they're very powerful. But in terms of the underlying topics, such as networking, infrastructure, data security. These are all conversations that are just fueled even more by this topic of generative AI. So with the influx of all of this data that we're getting from these models, the conversations are around how do we make sure we find the representative data sets to train the models that we have in-house so that they're utilized and they're updated and they're modified appropriately.
Yeah, great points. Well, we're all excited about thinking about ways to use this, the underlying infrastructure in terms of how this can be implemented at scale, how it can be implemented with the right data, with protected data in an assured way is really critical here. And it's forcing us to really think through that aspect of it as well. Yeah, I'm going to switch back to you here too and help us think about the use cases from your perspective. I mean, you've been talking about this topic for quite some time. You've been talking about this topic with significant world leaders on a world scale, and how this can have an impact at so many different levels, from a geopolitical standpoint, a societal standpoint, economic standpoint. I mean, what are some of the use cases that you see, and what are your reactions to some of what Jazmin has laid out here?
So when I initially came to the space, I was looking at it from the disinformation and information integrity perspective. So in terms of one of the potentially even existential risks, that is one of the main ones, because as the information ecosystem increasingly becomes inundated with AI generated content, including visual content that looks as though it is authentic. You cannot distinguish between human generated media and AI generated media. You start to lose trust in the entire medium of digital media itself. So that's one of the most existential risks from a geopolitical perspective about, again, looking at it from the information integrity perspective. However, in terms of utility and the first use cases, and this has really been an interesting journey for me because I initially came at it from the risk perspective, but I very quickly realized that these technologies are going to completely transform the economy and the world of work. And this is really where we start to see the first very charismatic business use cases emerging again in 2023. Until about this year, a lot of the research was in nonprofit organizations. It wasn't open for the public. It was kind of enclosed within the AI research community. But several things happened last year that completely have opened this up. The first was the open source release of Stable Diffusion. It's from a British AI company. It's a model. It's an AI model that can basically generate images from any text prompt. So I type something into the AI system, whatever it is, a photograph of a unicorn driving a car to the moon, and the AI can generate that instantaneously. And this is significant because it's one of those foundational general purpose models, meaning this is an AI which isn't just tuned to do one thing like play chess. This is an AI system that can generate any image based on a text prompt. So it's a general purpose model. Because this model was released open source, it really kind of kicked off an arms race, if you will, within the companies that were developing these foundational generative models. Thus far, they had kept them behind rails because they were afraid of how people might misuse them. But the open source release of Stable Diffusion made such a splash that the next thing you saw is OpenAI, the creator of ChatGPT, as well as other kind of generative models, also really start to be opening up. This is actually what led to, I believe, ChatGPT being released, because ChatGPT is just one implementation of a large language model, i.e. a model that can generate text. Again, a general purpose model that can generate text based on any kind of prompt. It could be, write me a thesis, write me a research paper, write me a poem. And that, Jazmin already touched upon it, did more for generative AI and AI's brand awareness than anything else. As a matter of fact, ChatGPT is the most popular application in the history of the world. It reached 100 million users within 2 months. Mm-hmm. And that subsequently has now got all the big tech companies in on the race. Every single big tech company is strategically reorienting to ensure that generative AI is a core part of their strategy. We saw that with Microsoft's $10 billion investment in OpenAI soon after ChatGPT came out. We see how Microsoft, Meta, Google, everybody is in on it. And the first thing that they're doing is developing these large language models, because the first use case is the narrow vertical of generating enterprise copy, i.e., how can every single business have their own version of ChatGPT, which is based on their internal data, that's really going to give them huge wins in automating some of their business processes, everything from sales to customer services to legal drafting to you name it, strategy documents. That's where we really see this cracking up wide open in 2023. And remember, that's only one type of generative model, a text generation model. So you can imagine how within 6 months or 12 months, the whole space is going to be even more inundated, moving, exciting. I mean, even the amount of money that's pouring into this space is utterly crazy.
That's exciting. So now let's take it to this larger topic of national security, right, that we want to hit on here today. You've given us some really interesting use cases to think about, both of you have. When we think about what you just said, Nina, in particular, ChatGPT, right, text generation model, and then you can throw in video generation that you touched on as well, or audio generation models. What are some of the use cases there that could actually be part of a national security system, a national security agency, a government agency, to be able to apply these capabilities in a very effective way to create value? Let's think about that. Let's brainstorm that here a little bit. What would be your thoughts there in terms of how these technologies can be used to enhance national security? What are your thoughts there?
So I'm going to flip that question on the head, because I always look at that question from the other side, having not worked with it, which is, how can these systems be a threat to national security? And that's really kind of where my field of expertise was before I ended up getting into deepfakes and then generative AI, because for over a decade, we were following influence and disinformation campaigns at the state level, right? All of this now seems to be ancient history, but if you consider how election interference and meddling in the affairs of sovereign nation states really started developing in the 2010s and was amplified in many ways by this new information ecosystem, right? The internet, social media, smartphones. It allowed adversarial nation states to enter into the political debate of our sovereign countries in a way that hadn't been possible before, because of the way that they were weaponizing social media to legitimately pose as citizens of our own countries, and then start creating narratives which were really, really divisive. We saw this in the 2016 election in the US, but even before that, one of the first breeding grounds for this, where I really witnessed it happening, was in Ukraine, starting in 2013. So those information campaigns were, regardless of, I know it's a very politicized question in the United States because of the fact that President Donald Trump was so polarizing, but putting aside the politicization for a second, those information campaigns were really effective because of the way that a foreign actor was able to infiltrate our national debate without even kind of setting a foot on soil of our country. Now, can you imagine how those kind of national information operations are going to be amplified through generative AI? You don't need to have a troll bot farm anymore. Now you basically just get a ChatGPT to generate whatever you want, because you can scale it. You can get fake imagery, fake video. You can manipulate any kind of political event to suit a narrative. You can do it at scale it's better, cheaper, faster. And if you already looked at the stuff which has been proliferating for the last 5 to 10 years and how effective it's been, I think you can imagine what you can do with AI-powered disinformation campaigns. So I think that's one thing, which is a direct attack. But another aspect of this is that the information ecosystem becomes even more corroded, the censorship by noise angle. How do you even distinguish what is authentic, what is not, what is truth, what is reality, which of course is fertile breeding grounds for public opinion to become even more polarized and there to be less consensus within our societies.
Yeah, really profound there in terms of those kinds of implications. And we've seen it play out, as you point out. We've been living through that and we've all seen it. So it's not something that we can't get our heads around here. And I want to circle back with you on how do we really manage those risks. But first I want to go to Jazmin here and Jazmin, get your thoughts. What do you see in terms of the implications of this capability, generative AI, on national security, both from a positive standpoint, ways it can be used to enhance our national security, or risk and threats to it, as Nina has pointed out? Take either side of that discussion, and what would you want to offer there?
Yes, so the opportunities, I think, we're seeing it a lot obviously in the unclassed side. This is where we're seeing a lot of the workforce improvement and revamping opportunities. And that really hinges on our workforce generally around, workforce management. Do we have a workforce in the national security space that's comfortable with these tools at all levels? Are they encouraged to use them for work? They're already doing it now in schools, in academia. They're creating courses and they're changing the course curriculum to utilize and incorporate the use of AI. And they're assuming that people are going to be using these tools for their classwork. Are we doing that same thing in the national security space? If we aren't, why not? People around me at work are using them already. And so people right now are researching about this topic. Now is the time that they're looking for the guidance, looking for the how-tos, looking for the what not to do's. So around workforce management, we need to make sure that our national security, the people in this space, that they're comfortable with using these tools and they're empowered to use these tools. Outside of the the workforce management sector in general, this is going to transform the work itself, as we have mentioned before. And while it may be immature and limited, especially in the national security space, when we're looking at other fields outside of just the day-to-day work, the reality is that this technology is here now. And so we need to work with these tools. A healthy defense industrial base is going to be imperative here. It's a national security imperative. So all the tools that we use, from administrative systems to weapons, they are all tied to it. Our national security partners and our vendors, they're trying to figure out how to use it. They're trying to figure out how to harness this information or how to harness this power. So we need to keep up with the advancements here and not slow down its adoption by having discussions around whether it's hype or not. Whether it's hype or not is not the important piece here. Opinions about these disruptive tools doesn't matter. The attitude that the national security space has towards these tools is what matters. If we can't embrace this technology, then we lose out on the potential, and we really risk underestimating the impact that it could have.
Yeah, really well said. I love what you said about the importance of making sure that our workforce is knowledgeable and skilled in how to best harness these tools and this capability that it can provide, and to reap the most out of it. Can we leverage this technology in a way that allows us to generate content that can provide new insights and can provide new information that can enhance our understanding and support our decision making? But is that underpinned by data that we can trust. And I think a lot of what Nina has kind of pointed out to us is that a fundamental challenge and a fundamental underbelly of all of this is our ability to trust what it is that we're looking at. What generative AI produces can in fact create results that may or may not be real and may or may not be authentic or authenticated. So how do we trust that? And how do we ensure that we can harness this in a way that allows us to manage and mitigate those risks? Nina, what are your thoughts? How do organizations prepare themselves best to be able to leverage this technology at scale and to be able to use it in a way that it can be reinforcing and that they can deal with this issue of misinformation, disinformation effectively? How do we combat that? How do we combat misinformation, disinformation, and be able to leverage these technologies in a way that gives us the most advantage? Your thoughts on that, Nina?
So I think it's pretty much the question on every single organization's lips right now. How do we leverage this technology while mitigating some of the worst kind of use cases? I think an interesting reflection, just as you were talking and Jazmin was talking about where this has potential utility in the national security sector, is just to be able to compile, I mean, the swathes and swathes and swathes of data and be able to pull out kind of like actionable insights. However, even though we know that particular large language models have these kind of capabilities, it's really important to point out, and this is again one of the existential potential risks, especially in the national security sector, these models are fallible. That means that sometimes their outputs, when it comes especially again to large language models, are just straight up wrong, but they can confidently spew outcomes that, you know, just from a human perspective, when you kind of get it from the machine interface and it looks like it's right, it sounds like it right, the large language model is projecting with so much confidence, you are more likely to accept it as being true when it's not, because they are not always right. They're not always telling the truth. So again, when you think of applying large language models to workflows, large language models being one type of generative model, we have to think about very holistically about what are their shortcomings, where are they fallible, because sometimes these powers seem almost omnipotent, so that we want to imbue them with almost sentient capabilities. Well, the machines are, you know, they'll just figure it out. They'll get everything right. Your other question about mis and disinformation, which is a broader question, I suppose, about the information ecosystem. I think the first thing, again, is just the conceptual understanding that we are looking at a tidal wave of information and content coming at us. Most of it is going to be AI generated because of the way that AI can generate content at scale. So it's not that all of it is going to be harmful or deceptive or made with malicious intent, but we are going to suffer this phenomenon known as censorship through noise because of the amount of stuff that's headed our way. Just being able to distinguish what's what is going to be really, really difficult. And when the field was initially emerging, and I think that DARPA has done a program on this for many, many years. The idea was, what we want to be able to do is to detect AI generated content. We want to build AI content detectors. But now the realization is dawning that detection is only one barrier, only one part of the defense. Instead, a more important and perhaps more proactive approach is to start thinking about transparency and authentication of all content. So for the first time, to start thinking about providing information with context. Where was this created? Who has this been created by? Is it authentic? I mean, is it generated by AI or not? Because a lot of the stuff that is AI generated isn't going to be malicious. So that you can make, or like people can make trust decisions based on context. You don't want to get into the business of telling people what's true or not, but you want to make it easier. You want to build the infrastructure for individuals, corporations, and nation states to make better trust decisions based on the context of information. Now, that's very difficult, of course, to roll out at scale, and it can only be adopted through the adoption of open standards. And there are organizations like the C2PA working on this, building open standards for media authentication and media provenance. But yeah, it's a difficult challenge to crack.
But you've given us some really interesting things to think about there. I think you've started to uncover some things that are really important for us in terms of the transparency and the authentication. I love how you said it. We're not going to get into the business of saying what to trust or what not to trust, but having the wherewithal to be able to make those trust decisions. And this, I think, is right in your wheelhouse, Jazmin, because you've been thinking about data and infrastructure and standards. And how do you assure that data for some time, and how do you put context around data so that when that data is fed up to systems that are going to apply it and make sense of it or use it in a model, that it comes with a certain degree of context. So what are your thoughts on how we can deal with some of these challenges of misinformation, disinformation in this large infocopalypse of information that we have to live within now? How do we address that? How can some of the foundations of infrastructure and standards help us address that a bit?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to having the right skill sets in terms of people and the right policies in place in terms of testing and auditing of our systems. There is already work from the CDAO side of the house when it comes to responsible artificial intelligence practices. How do we make sure that we are auditing our systems that are leveraging artificial intelligence so that they are providing information that is not biased, that they're using data that is clean and healthy? So investing in that and putting more scrutiny on that, especially in the light of generative AI and all the threats that come with it, that is really important. The other aspect is the skill sets around people. We have a lot of people in the national security space that are focused on, of course, like the program and the business side of the house, because we're executing funds, we're giving out money, we're giving money to defense industrial base for these systems. But in terms of the people, that the skill sets of folks that are assessing these systems on the government side, we have to invest in the artificial intelligence folks, these query engineers, these like machine learning experts, and people that are more technically minded to be able to look at these models and communicate the results of these models, question that transparency, and have the wherewithal to be able to, in detail, analyze these models. So it's the skill sets and the processes that the national security realm has to focus on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for laying that out for us, Jazmin. I think those are really helpful thoughts and insights there. All right, now a question for both of you as we wrap this up. Things have been changing so fast. You put it out there for us. I mean, a year ago, generative AI wasn't even a thing really that people were talking about. You were talking about it. You've been talking about it for some time, but the world hadn't quite caught on, and it's caught on like crazy. But what do we see happening in the next 12 months? What's your prediction where all this is going to head just in the next 12 months? What are your thoughts there?
So I think it's going to get absolutely crazy because this technology is exponential. And it's not only that this technology is exponential, just broadly, we are entering this era of unbelievable tech-led change where society is going to transform in the most profound ways very, very quickly. I don't think there is any historical precedent. My expectation for the broader picture is that in our lifetime, we will experience more tech-led change that's going to profoundly impact the economy, society, our very experience of what it is to be human. We'll experience more of that in one lifetime than the entirety of humanity has experienced before that. And if you kind of look at the trajectory of technology along with the advent of human civilization, you can see how the pace has been picking up. It took us 300,000 years to get to the invention of paper. And then just think about what's happened in the last 30 years alone with the internet, the smartphone, social media, and now we're taking that a notch further with the advent of this new type of AI. So specifically on generative AI, what are my predictions? So I predicted at the end of last year that hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people would be interfacing with generative AI this year by 2023. We're only in March. And it looks like that prediction has already come through ChatGPT alone because of the way that it's also been deployed in Microsoft's kind of software stack. So billions of people will be interfacing with generative AI by the end of the year. I think this is going to be the most profound uptake of any body of technologies ever in the history of the world. I think the world of work is rapidly going to transform because of the way that it's being integrated into businesses and this kind of like software AI automation layer, which is going to lead to profound philosophical questions about, is AI going to automate me? How does this affect my future prospects and capabilities? And I think that this is going to become one of the #1 political issues in the world. And I think that by the end of the year, nobody will be able to, if you haven't heard of generative AI yet, you heard it here first, and you're not going to stop hearing it for the rest of the year.
Absolutely. Jazmin, what are your predictions? What do you think is going to happen in the next year relative to generative AI?
Yes, same sentiment. This ecosystem is going to flourish. I mean, March 1st, the ChatGPT API was just made available to developers, and anyone can integrate and tap into that ChatGPT ecosystem, the capability there. And only more tools are going to be following in the same footsteps. So while this provides so much opportunity and it will impact certain jobs, it will open quite a few new jobs. We're already seeing the job postings out there for query engineers or engineering that has a focus on how to optimize these queries with these models. We're going to see an increase in the number of entrepreneurs that are out there, that now that people can do more with less and do more with a smaller team, you don't have as many of those dependencies, you can automate a lot of things. This really lowers the barrier to entry when it comes to entrepreneurship. And then, as we were saying before, this is going to increasingly dominate, especially in the creative space. I mean, we're seeing things like DALL-E, Midjourney in the graphics area, but in the entertainment industry, I just saw a couple of days ago that it was a use of generative AI to improve dubbing so that the speakers' mouths and their voices are altered to match different languages. So you only need to film a movie once and it's seamlessly in 5 different languages, just like that. So this is going to continue, we're going to continue to see these changes in the creative space. It's going to be very exciting. Then in terms of right now, what people can do to prepare for this next year, I would say to use generative AI tools. That the more that you use them, the more that you understand how to use it for your own life. We also understand more the limitations, because our perceptions that we derive about these AI tools now are going to drive the development and the policies to come.
Absolutely. Brilliant insight there as well. Well, thank you both so much. You've given us so much to think about. We are at the cusp, I think, of this rapidly exploding technology. It is exponential, as you said, Nina, and we are living through it every single day. Every single day, something new is coming out, something new is changing. We've seen the rapid pace of technology, as you mentioned, over the last 30 years, and now it just seems like it's a daily evolution that we're witnessing and that we are a part of, that is changing our everyday lives, changing the way we think, changing the way we work, changing what we can do, and certainly has implications on the national and international and geopolitical levels that we have to be thinking about, we have to be wary of, we have to be mindful of as we continue to surge forward, taking advantages of all the opportunities that technology can provide, that AI can provide to us as a society, that generative AI can do in unleashing information in new ways, that unleashing and advancing our creativity in new ways, but yet also coming with a certain amount of risk, coming with a certain amount of fallibility that we absolutely have to be not only aware of, but distrustful of, so that we can approach it objectively, and we can ensure that we've got the right infrastructure, that we've got effective ways to enable trust-based decisions on what we do with this information that is presented to us. You all have given us so much to think about. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your research. Thank you for your engagement every single day in this topic, so that we can continue to learn from both of you, and we can continue to take your thoughts and your insights into our everyday thinking and working in ways that can help us be much more effective in how we operate. I'm Kim Crider, America Future Series. This has been a fabulous conversation on generative AI and its implications on national security. Thank you both.
Thank you.